This panel, I'm just going to share some words together with Alessandra to ground the conversation. This panel is called Observatories for Earthly Education. And with that, it aligns with the exhibition Critical Zones, which in its subtitle calls for Observatories for Earthly Politics. It follows the thought that if we want to foster practices of living and dying well together, as Donna Haraway would say, we need to acknowledge the fact that we are earthbound. Saying we are terrestrials amid terrestrials does not lead to the same politics as saying we are humans in nature. And this is a central quote from Bruno Latour. And the question this panel would like to ask is, if we acknowledge that we are terrestrials amid terrestrials, what type of education do we need then? And what is there to learn? Personally, I'm speaking from the point of view of an art educator working at the art mediation department of the ZKM. So that's quite a big Western media art institution. One thing that I really love about the museum or the exhibition space as a space for education is that it holds so much potential for change and so much joy for critical thinking and collective imagination. And also, of course, art's power of being inventive facing troubled times. But of course, the museum space always is and will always be an institutionalized space, a space of power. And the previous discussion was really wonderful in underlying this. And while there's a thriving discourse about museums having a mandate of social responsibility, I wonder how this responsibility has changed or needs to be expanded in the context of the ecological crisis we are facing. And I'm really delighted that we can explore this question together today with four really interesting and also really different positions of what a possible earthly education might look like. And most of all, again, I'm so grateful that I'm joined by the fabulous Alessandra Pomarico. And Alessandra, I really want to take this moment to thank you for embarking on this journey with me. We really followed an intuition, and it's really also in the sense of never going anywhere alone that we're sharing this moderation. So thank you. And yeah, I pass on to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Barbara. It was an intuition, it's true. And I also thank you very much for the generosity that you have opened up the space to me and those friends that I bring. There are many, that some are here with me in spirit, because so many people we learn from and with. And I really enjoyed how our conversation actually evolved, and we share a lot of questions and we share a lot of intentions that we are bringing here today and that will be explored with this wonderful guest we have. And the first thing you sent to me was a kind of brave statement, which is taken from this amazing initiative of the exhibition and making exhibitions as earthly politics that required an earthly education that has to be articulated also through reimagining cultural institutions. And I'm totally with you with that. I think we share this idea that education here is considered a political question and a question of care. It's a practice of care. I think we come here with understanding that to produce a paradigmatic shift, a movement towards a personal, interpersonal, and hopefully systemic change, the question of education is quite central. And what we mean by education is not only confined to those space dedicated to education, formal or informal space, but we consider learning as something that we do everywhere, all the time, and with everyone. So in this sense, an expanded learning process that brings us to think more intentionally how we design this process, how we open up our learning abilities, our capacities. And I also want to really thank Alicia for opening up our bodies in this beautiful way. I think when we question how we listen, which is such an important question for learning process, it's very important that we prepare our body to listen and to bring, thank you for bringing in the wisdom of the body and to make us more attuned to each other, to lower our brain waves, which is also very important when we tackle difficult questions, because this is the question of education, the question of an earthly bounded education is quite challenging right now, as we are in the middle of a civilization crisis that is manifesting as an ecological, as an ecocide, as we all know, especially in this moment of the pandemic. This has become so manifested. But for us, the question is always, okay, we know the fact, we know the science, we know the numbers. Scientists told us we are almost at this point of non-return. We know that even by changing some behavior, like eating less meat produced in the industrial meat complex, or eating the foods that consume so much of the natural resource, things could be changed. But why we are not able to produce this change? What it is that impede us from delinking from this consumerism, this way of living in which we are separated from nature, right? This is the central question that we have been socialized and we have internalized through modernity, through coloniality, this separation from nature. We live in an anthropocentric way. And we kind of forget that we are part of a larger ecosystem, and that actually the human element in it is so small, but it's been the one distracting the most, exploiting and extracting and generating the daring moment, the necropolitics that we are living right now. So in this, a lot of us think that the role of education here is really fundamental. We need to unlearn this kind of patriarchal, capitalist, anthropocentric paradigm. We need to learn from others that have resisted and saved the way of knowing, the way of being, and of relating in different ways from what we experience in the West and what we have exported, and through colonization, we have erased so many ways of living that are still meant to protect life and to regenerate life. So we are especially interested in this conversation, in which we brought together people that cultivate what many people call now institution of the commons, coalitional learning spaces that help us to unlearn those destructive paradigms, relearn in a more relational way, with reciprocity. Those experiences that help us to learn from the land, which means also learn from ancestral knowledges, and learn with the larger we, learn within this ecosystem, this larger metabolism that we are part of. So for us, the teachers are also really the multi-species. And so what does it mean to learn, to relearn this cohabitation with the multi-species, our entanglement with the more than human, how we can develop a relationship outside of this almost immanent capitalistic relationship, and how we try to avoid making knowledge and knowledge sharing as another commodity, which is happening in the neoliberal university, for example, or even in the space of learning of the museum, how we avoid also exploiting other ways of knowing, how we can learn from without extracting from that. So there is many questions that we are solicited with, and we would like to explore with the beautiful contributors that we have called. With Kahakalau, she's the founder of education with Aloha Ecoversity in Hilo, Hawaii Island, the occupied territory of Hawaii. We have here today also Marion Louis-Grand-Silla. She's the co-founder of Kertiosan in Dakar, and Rosario Talevi and Sarah Bovlet from the Floating University in Berlin. We were supposed to have also Cara Courage, who is the head of the Tate exchange, and unfortunately she cannot join because of some family emergency. We are sending her our best wishes. So yeah, it is for us a great pleasure to explore this possibility together. And especially, I think, Barbara, for you was very important to tackle the question of how we could build alliances and friendship, and in order to mutually reinforce also our initiatives, and especially how we can bridge between institutions, formal institutions like the academy, the university, the schools, and cultural institutions like the museum, and the most para institutions, I would call those self-organized practices or community practices that create their own space of learning and their own pedagogies, and how we can link together. So that's why in the panel today, we have brought together different experiences, because it is paramount to learn from each other, and also as I was saying, in the spirit of respect of the autonomy and particular formations that are behind these learning spaces. And it is especially my pleasure to start this conversation with Ku. I share a lot of space with Ku, a beautiful space of a larger alliance that is called the Ecoversity Alliance. It is a worldwide initiative gathering so many educators, fierce care educators and learners from all over the world. We especially focus on indigenous and traditional knowledge and epistemologies from the South, let's say, from centering. In this network, there are people doing very different things inside the institution and outside. And the perspective is mostly eco-centered and social justice form of education. And it goes from permaculture to alternative schools, and many artistic practices also have converged in this space, as we also, another point of sharing experience with Barbara and bringing this conversation together was also the experience that artistic practice or artistic thinking and perspectives can give us so many tools to exactly also exercise our imaginary in direction that are not there yet, which is what we are looking forward if we need to sort of compost this way of living and create new and go back to, as Ku would say, ancient ways of living. And Ku has been for me a teacher, a friend, a comrade, and a teacher. She has created various various educational schools and forms of learning in Hawaii based on traditional Hawaiian forms of knowledge. She has been the first scholar of indigenous studies, the first one who reached a PhD in her community, but she created these spaces that are centered in traditional Hawaiian knowledge. And for me, it's been always so interesting to see her, how she really bridged these words and how she built her pedagogy since 30 years in learning initiatives that are really learning from the land and with the notion and principle of aloha and of ahini that I hope she, and I'm sure she will explore more with us. So Ku, please welcome here. And thank you so much for joining us. It's very early in Hawaii.
Hi. Alohe, alohe na kua, alohe na aumakua, alohe na liihonua, alohe na kupuna, alohe na makua. Alohe ka lehulehu. Aloha. Aloha mai kākou, ku hina hina kui kahakai kahakalau ko o inoa. O Honolulu, ku o Nehānau, o Hawaiʻi, ku o Mokopuni. O Kilauea, ku o Mauna, o Waipio, ku o Awawa. A o Hiʻilawe ku Wailele. O Keia ku makua kane, a me ku makua hine. A o Keia ku ohana. Aloha mai kākou. Good morning, everybody. This whole thing is not going to be in the Hawaiian language, so don't worry. But because many people don't even know that there's such a thing as Hawaiian language, I figured I'll start us off in the traditional language of our land. And just give you a very brief history lesson. So we were first contacted by the outside in 1778. At that time, there were about 1 million people living on our islands, and we were fully self-sustainable. We are over 2,000 miles away from any other place. So we were able to develop this idea of aloha, of taking care of one another, taking care of the land, and taking care of the spiritual world. All of those things came together in order to be honorable, in order to be responsible, in order to be good. You had to take care of both the spiritual world and the land, as well as also one another, because there was nobody else that was going to help you to take care of anything. And so then contact happened in 1778. And by 1893, over 90% of our people were dead and our land was in other hands, particularly starting in 1893 when the United States of America invaded our country and disposed our queen, who was recognized internationally as a figurehead, as the ruler of our country. At that time, we had the highest literacy along with New England and Scotland in the world. So we were the most educated people, among the top 3 educated people in the world. And then sadly, within 80 years, we became the most under and uneducated people in our homeland as a result of US occupation and Americanization. So here is our islands, and here is my island, and here is the place that I'm going to be talking about, where I have been doing land-based education in the environment for the last 35 years. This is the valley that we've been working in primarily. It's called Waipio, which means the arching waters, because you can really see the water cycle happening right within this mini ecosystem. And it's been, as I said, our outdoor learning laboratory from infant to elder. So womb to tomb, learning laboratory. And I started a school in 2000, the first Hawaiian-focused charter school. And every other week, our students would live in this valley from Monday to Thursday. And then the next week they would be at a campus where we had actually electricity and running water, et cetera, et cetera. And they would learn, technology, and they would take that information that they learned in the environment and incorporate it using multimedia technology, et cetera. My latest venture, so we are trying to create a parallel system of education for Native Hawaiians. I've done the PK-12, so all the way to elementary, middle, and high school, also early childhood. Now we're doing higher education. And so in October 2020, we started EA, which stands for Education with Aloha, Ecoversity. And our learners are opening up a 5-acre piece, and they're getting paid full time while they are learning from the land. And that's really it. The land is our textbook. The land is our teacher. And so here is this 5-acre piece called Kapapalo'i o Keali'i Kua'aina. This is what it looked like. It was fully overgrown, 40 years of growth. And then, and Keali'i Kua'aina is my daughter. That's her middle name. It's an ancestral name, and it means the chiefess of the backcountry. And she's a business owner. We both own Kuakanaka, a Hawaiian women-owned social enterprise. She's also a taro planter. She's born and raised in that valley. She's been doing this since she was 2 years old, as far as planting taro. But she's also a web designer. And so you can see her. You don't have to go over all these things. She has 120,000 followers on TikTok talking about land and land education. So, this is the new generation that's coming up that we've been cultivating for the last 35 years. And I am very proud of her, obviously. I also have another daughter that I'm also very proud of, but in this case, this is about her. And here are some of the young people that are working. This young man just graduated from high school. This was his first fencing job. And, we couldn't be prouder of him to step up and be responsible and learn. We have to fence because we have wild horses, and they would be eating all of our things. So here you see our learners at Ea Ecoversity. It's hot in Hawaii, so excuse us for not wearing too much clothes here. But that's how we work, that's how we live. And now all of this that was overgrown that you saw earlier, we have these taro patches, and they're putting in their pipes, and we started to plant after our seasons. We have a dry season and a wet season. And during the wet season, we don't plant, we don't engage in hard work, we don't do war during that time. And so we just transitioned at the equinox, and now it's time to plant again. So I'm very, very excited to be with you folks today and share a little bit more about Aloha Aina, or love for the environment. And what that kind of Aloha Aina is, it's really something that's grounded in our cosmogonic genealogy. So for us, we have cosmogonic genealogies, which means it goes from myself all the way back to the beginning of time, to Earth Mother and Sky Father, and them giving birth to the islands, them giving birth to this plant called the taro, which you see growing here in the wetland patches, who is our older brother, just like the islands are our older siblings. And so from the beginning of time, this ancestral relationship between the land, and in this case also a plant named the taro, and us people was defined already. The land is our older sibling, and it needs to provide for us, it needs to protect us, it needs to shelter us. And we are the younger siblings. We need to serve, we need to tend to our older brother, just the way we do in a Hawaiian family. And so this is the way for us that our relation to the land is grounded through a familial relationship that was established at the beginning of time. And our chant says, "Ua ke ano hui a papa hānau moku, hānau Hawaiʻi he moku, hānau Maui he moku. Ho I hou wā ke ano hui a hoku kalani, hānau o ahu he moku, hānau o Molokaʻi he moku, hānau lana I ka ula he moku. Lili o pūpuna lua papa ia ho o hoku kalani ho, I ho papa no hui a wā ke a, hānau ka Hawaiʻi he moku, hānau I hau he moku, he ula a o ka ho o lawe." These are chants that are thousands of years old, and they have been preserved, and now our children are chanting them again, and they understand their relationship to the land based on these chants. So that's my introduction, and I'm so looking forward to this discussion as we continue. Mahalo. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ku. I think so touching and amazing to have included a different language also, and also we can hear the sound of animals in the back. And I think that we will be able to see the sunrise throughout your window because you're joining it literally, I think it's 6 a.m. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you also for this, this dipping into ancestral knowledge and for sharing it with us. Thank you so much. From you, I would like to transition to Marion. And Marion, you are sitting on yet another continent. You are in Dakar, in Senegal. And you have co-founded the Kertiosan. The Kertiosan is a public space for common learning in between technology and the environment. And that's really what I found also so interesting about your project, because your interest and your understanding of the commons really materializes around a Fab Lab and a common garden. So it would be lovely if you could just share a little bit of this project, the School of Commons, with us and tell us how, in your vision, sharing knowledge goes hand in hand with a Fab Lab and with a garden.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Alessandra. Thanks, Stefan, for the invitation. So yes, I will try today to explain what we do. First of all, Kertiosan is I will share my screen. Kertiosan is an art center that I co-founded with my husband, who is artist in Dakar city in 2002, and to bring new media to artists in Senegal, where culture and art is very rich, but there was no much, there was this kind of technology division. So we started to do many workshops for artists, but also for students from university, tech lovers, to also bring them and work with artists. So we approached the technology first. I wanted to, in the open source, with the open source philosophy and sharing knowledge. And we started many artist residence workshops, experimenting with art and society. It's a center that is in a private house, so it's really based with the community and surrounding. And the project we developed are really linked with the problematics of the Dakar city, and it's like this after the social World Forum in 2011 in Dakar. Then we have been approached by partners from Canada to do a project around the commons, and we was wondering what means the commons in Senegal. And we started to do breakfast in commons, working around commons with artists, and organizing breakfast discussion about that. But after, we wanted to go further and try to do a school of commons, to really experiment the commons and go further to try art and society, to see the possibility of art in the problematic of our surrounding. And it's like that we propose, there are not many empty space in Dakar city, but there was a kind of garbage place around buildings where people had some conflicts. And we started and proposed to do a garden, because there are not many green space anymore in Dakar. It's, and to start a Fab Lab and a garden as a School of Commons, working with the surrounding. And we invited an artist to think an artistic garden. And the Fab Lab was built next to the garden. It's the first Fab Lab in Dakar, but it was a choice to put it in the public space between the craftsman workshops. And like this, we started to do workshop, inviting artists and working with the social center and linked the garden and the Fab Labs with different, with technology, art and society. So it's very long-term project, and voilà, it started in 2014 with we have a festival called Afropixel with an edition that we call the Garden of Resistance. But as you can see, we can work with the people driving horses in Dakar. It's linked with animals, with children, with women also. And it's long-term project, but after we, through art piece, it had started to launch a dialogue with women who really wanted to practice more culture. And with the partnership of University Botanic Department, we trained them to the permaculture. So as you can see, we can go from low-tech to high-tech workshops, really linked to the problematics, nowadays problematics, and recycling and working with, and all the workshops we do, we try to mix very different publics. It's really sharing knowledge philosophy, open source and sharing knowledge. You can see here is the fridge from the desert. So how we can also, colors, textile, really to work with and to document and to share that. We just finished the last Afropixel edition about, it was power to the commons, but to think about the ethics of the technology also, and how it's important also to think commons from the South perspective and to understand what means commons in the South perspective. That's all for the moment.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you so much. I love how in both what you have shared, Ku and Marion, there is this notion of repair, and also this notion of ancient traditional knowledge and contemporary technology, which I think also what the exhibition in the Center for Art and Media of Karlsruhe is really focused on, and how these, again, these words and these forms of knowledge that sometimes they are perceived as opposite can actually really come together and offer possibility of acting and reimagining our words and our everyday life. It's really beautiful. Thank you so much. And I think this what you shared also about the School of Commons, which again are cultural and natural commons, is also what Rosario and Sara and many other in the university, in the floating university, are also bringing together. They're working in this very interesting natural urban environment, and I know also you touch a lot on this question of the ethics of technology and the ethics of care, and how both curatorial, political, philosophical work can also be expressed to very practical forms of knowledge through building, through regeneration of the land, and that's part of what we call decolonizing knowledge. And you have worked a lot around the question of rewilding. I think it's to our topic of conversation, it's very important that you touch on that. I know also all these projects have so many facets and so many levels. Sometimes it's hard to describe just a couple of tools, but I hope you can touch on that, all the work you have done around management of waste and how to avoid the technocratic attacks that you have you have also have to dealt with when touching at this very central area of Berlin that was certainly very, where many were very interested, right? And how you did that really through the activation of the community, of the neighbors. So please share with us your wonderful project.
Yes, thank you, Alessandra, Barbara, Hu, and Marion for sharing this space. I'm here with Sarah. Gili Kajewski was also supposed to join us, but she's, well, not available. But we will see soon a small video with her voice as a way also to bring her into the panel. And yes, Floating University, it's a rather complex entity to describe in 5 minutes. But we've been lately addressing it or trying to communicate it through 3 elements that might be a good starting point. So the first element is that it's a built water infrastructure. So the site of the Floating University, it's a reclaimed piece of land, first by a referendum, because it's a water reservoir, it's a rainwater reservoir that serves the Tempelhof Airport in Berlin. And this was reclaimed by the citizenship in 2014 by a citywide referendum. So it's always good for us to name this history and this genealogy. And then it was hybridized by us, by Floating, yeah. In 2018, this was opened as a temporary project initiated by Raumlabor. This is a group of architects who has been working in Berlin for more than 20 years. And I think this idea of opening this site came also along with this idea of hybridizing its use. So from a monofunctional space in the city, closed, only as a site for experts, yeah, where water technicians or city officials could have access, then suddenly it's opened up and is inhabited by many different types of knowledges, yeah, and expertise. So I think this is something very important. We also call it a natural, non-natural site. And we will see in the video some few images because it looks like an oasis, yeah, when you come in. But it's actually polluted water and a hard surface. It was encased in the 40s after the Americans took over Berlin. So it's quite interesting. We like to use Donald Haraway's term, nature culture, or Gilles Clement, third space, third landscape. And we like to, and connecting to the rewilding process that I will touch on that as well. There is this, we like to keep with this complexity that it looks natural, it's not natural. It was closed off over 80 years. And the nature took over. So this whole idea of what is nature as a concept, yeah, what is nature from our Western perspective, how does it look like, and so on. It's we like to keep that complexity. So the idea of the rewilding process, or in German they use the word Renaturalisierung, so to renaturalize something, it's quite problematic when it's lacking, let's say. Or it goes towards the romanticization of something, yeah? So it's in the same way that a few years ago, they reconstructed a Baroque palace in the middle of the city. And bringing back the nature and trying to, let's say, renaturalize a public infrastructure, it's also, for me, it's dangerous because it has the same, it feels that it has the same romantic idea of, you know, this recolonializing, or it's like bringing the Humboldt Forum back and so on. It's the same mindset. And we should be very wary of that, even though it's offered as we're going to give back the space back to the city, yeah, which we have done already 3 years ago. But to continue on this, the 3 elements, the second element for us is the human culture. So this, as I said before, it was a project that started as a temporary intervention of 6 months with a typical interim use, Zwischennutzung, intervention, permit, where they allow you to do stuff in public. Oh, that's a cute baby. They allow you to do something in public for 6 months, and then you have to go, yeah? But what happened at the end of that 6 months is that the group of people that gathered around the project was so enthusiastic, and there was such a nice response that we decided to move from a temporary project into a long-term engagement with a site, and move again, this transitioning from the typical, and that's why the human culture, how do we move from, let's say, a 6-month temporary project organization into an association that it's self-organized, plural, horizontal. And that we have done a lot by introducing feminist methodologies of reorganization, and like from opening budgets and doing participatory budget distribution, where normally budgets that were kept for the let's say the managers or of the project leaders are then open to the whole association and discussed through convened and mediated workshop sessions, which are not easy and they're difficult, but one has to engage with this, complications or like uncomfortable moments of discussing how do we distribute resources. From that to doing visioning sessions and meditating all together on the side to think about the future and what do we want and so on. So that's the element human culture. And then the last element is this multi-species overlay. And here, when I was listening to Ku, even though the projects are so different and the sites are like very different, the way she used this learning from the land or learning from the site, that's for us very, very important. And this is by recognizing that there is a multi-species overlay, even if we're still in an urban infrastructure. And the other term that resonated quite nicely, and that's also how we understand our relationship here, is the stewardship. So the idea of being custodianships of a site, stewardships or stewards, and developing empathy beyond the human, and to understand that this place is not just a piece of land that belongs to the city, and that of course there are many, let's say, stakeholders that have an interest in turning into, I don't know, a profitable asset for housing complexes or sports facilities or whatever, but that the history and the genealogy of the site has its own agency and has its own, let's say, standing. Yeah. And I think this is done by understanding and by becoming aware that we're not alone there, and it's not just concrete. Yeah. So this is a little bit the setting of, or how we describe floating through these three elements that interrelate with one another in a very complex manner. And then, of course, on that, we have so many ways that the pedagogies unfolds, and so many different programs and people doing stuff and ways of collaborating and bringing content and learning from one another and so on. But I think for that, one example is I would like to draw your attention to is the festival I curate together with Gili Karjewski, Climate Care, which we also understand a festival and a series of events as a curriculum, as a way of learning. It's not just events that happen, but we understand it as, when we curate it, we understand it as a, let's say, a body of knowledge. And then the video can speak for that, but I would like to also, Sarah, sorry, I went into the blue. Sarah is, I might introduce you. She started as an intern at the Floating in 2018, and today she's part of the executive board of the Floating. So she's been also bringing a lot of knowledge and super interesting ways of doing, especially from the student perspective. And today she runs together with Jan and a few others as well, the Free Radicals and the Learnscapes initiatives, which I would pass the word to you, Sarah, that you can explain much better than I.
Yeah, I think that Rosario really nicely described the setting that we find ourselves in at the Floating, that we are in this huge rainwater retention basin across from the airport, where in 2018 we built up these structures and created these the setting for students to come and learn outside of their institutions inside this basin. So we had collaborations with more than 20 universities from all over Europe and some even from outside of Europe, coming in with their professors and spending some time on site developing projects that were part of their semesters, but then kind of also became very site specific and very connected to whatever they actually found on site or being at the site. And this developed over the course of the 3 past years. And in this year, we asked in an open call, we asked students without their professors, so self-organized student initiatives, to send us proposals for their ideas of how they would like to come on site and be on site outside of the regulations that come with being part of an institution, and just make use of this space and all that it comes with to develop freely. And so this is what is happening at the moment, and this is what we're starting right now. And I think besides that, there's a lot of other interesting learning, and also I would want to add unlearning projects happening at the floating. And this is also through these open calls, a lot of topics are raised by other people, also what they are wanting to unlearn. And I think this is very interesting to see.
Sarah and Rosario. And I also wanted to say hello to our youngest panel member who just joined us. It's lovely to have, hello. We have a very good age difference and age quota in our round. So thank you very much also. Thank you to all of you for all your thoughts, and especially also for the little dipping now into the floating university, into the nature culture and the third landscape that you just described. And Alessandra, if I may, I think I would like to ask a question to all our panelists about this idea of place, because I think that this is something that links beautifully all the different positions that we have here. And it's this notion of place, and in the context of critical zones of the exhibition, it would also have been the dwelling place. So knowing what ground you stand on, knowing who you share the ground with, knowing who you have to care for, who cares for you on this specific ground. And therefore, that's what Bruno Latour always says in kind of a military vocabulary, who you need to defend or what you need to defend. And maybe it would be nice for everyone to share about how education can foster this relationship with place. So really foster an attitude of care for different people, for different audiences. That could be something just really from your practice. How do you foster this attitude of attention for a place with different audiences? That would be my first question to everybody. I don't know who wants to start.
I'll be happy to start if that's okay. Yeah. So I don't know if you noticed how I introduced myself, but I told you, not just my birthplace, but my mountain and my island, my valley, my river, my waterfall, those kind of things. And that's one of the first places where we start, is that we ask all of our learners to think about who. It's a what. It's not a what in our language, it's a who. Who are the places that have shaped them into who they are? So they have to think about those things. And then they have to articulate it. And it becomes part of their standard introduction. So they are who they are based on the places who have shaped them from infancy on. And every one of our student learners, whether they're my 2-year-old grandson could almost tell you his places already, but by 4 years old for sure, in preschool, they can already tell you who these places are that are shaping them into who they are. And so they have these connections. They know the winds of the valley. They know the names of the rains we have. Every place has its own name for its winds, not just one wind, but there's always multiple winds. If you guys watch winds, you know they don't always come from the same place. My German grandma talked about the Sibirischen Eiswinde, the ice winds that come from Siberia kind of thing. So it's in other places too, but they know the names of their winds, they know the names of the rains, they know the names of the waterfalls and of the various places, the surf spots. Each spot has a different name. Our ancestors gave them names because they were real. They were personal. We personified them by giving them names. And so just by learning those names and by articulating your relationship to those lands, makes it real, right? It creates a permanent relationship, and that relationship is what grounds them, and that is where they can draw strength from. That is where they can learn from and understand who they are and why they act the way they do, because you are really a different person if you come from the dry side versus the wet side of our island. Very different personalities if you're coming from the mountains or if you're coming from the ocean. Very different personalities again. And so they watch from very young on already how the environment shapes who we are.
Kind of also what Rosario said about becoming a custodian or a steward. Yeah. How does that work at the floating? Because that's completely different. So in the floating, you're in this asphalt place.
Well, this was an observation that we had with Gili on the second year. So the first year was this massive, in 2018, huge, let's say, intervention in the basin with a fantastic architecture by Ramlavor, which was glowing at the night. And, it was kind of this momentum of opening the space and people coming from all over the world to do stuff. And I had this kind of firework moment. And then the next year, when we started the association, or this becoming an association process, we started thinking, not only because we also had really considerable amounts of less budget, but also because we thought, okay, we've been here now and we're going to be here for the rest of, for a long time. So we need to get to know this place. And how do we know this space? And that was the way that we curated climate care. So climate care was really born out of being on the site. So we had from, and by bridging, the other observation was that we wanted to bring in the ethics of care into the climate discourse, into the climate crisis discourse. So basically those were the elements of the festival. And so we set up from workshops where we invited a biology student to do a kids workshop to get to know the algae on site. So the rainwater collects different types of algae depending on the weather and the weather conditions. So we had someone studying them and then making a workshop where kids were collecting them and drawing them. Then we had another workshop where participants were invited to become, develop some kind of relationship with the plants around the basin. So it was not only about learning the name of the plant, but drawing it and touching it and feeling with it and so on. We also had many different kinds of embodied practices, musicians playing music with reeds, the tours with rubber boot tours where you go into the basin and you feel the mud and then you feel the concrete on the base and you realize that it's constructed and it's not really a pond. So we had all of these different activities which allowed us to ground ourselves on the basin, on the site, and develop a relationship to it. So in a very different way, but I think it's it's the same that what Ku is saying, no? Like you need to, with the elements that are there, you need to develop this empathy with concrete, with algae, with polluted water. So we don't make a difference. We engage with all of this. Yeah.
I just want to add that I think it's important that you say also the seasons, because even though we're in this concrete basin, you still feel the seasons. Like the site changes completely during the year. In the winter, it's completely an entirely different atmosphere than it is right now. And in the summer, it will be also very different than it is right now. But what is also, I think, very special then about this basin is that only by being there and being there in different days during a long course of time, you actually notice how it functions, because it is an infrastructure that is human-made, and it's an infrastructure that is supposed to collect rain. And if you go there on a sunny day and you see that it looks like an oasis, how Rosario just described it, you see this nice pool of water, but only if you're there on a heavy rain day, you realize it actually can also be a very scary infrastructure where this water shoots in from the former airport, and you have 20 minutes of time to tidy up and collect chairs and save everything that's valuable. And I think being exposed to this is very unusual in the city, because you don't really have this sudden moments anymore, because you're so protected by the infrastructure that is around us. And we're finding ourselves in this infrastructure that is actually not made for us to have inhabited it. And I think this also made us caring for it, it broke our routines of how you usually act when it rains.
Yeah. Yes, and I think just to add some, I think the idea of hybridizing an infrastructure that was built as a monofunctional entity, it has to do with this process of breaking up with modernity. Yeah, so it's also, these processes can also take place in the middle of the city. I think that's quite important as well, because it's not only about going to the rural places. No, it's like, how do we engage with these complexities in the middle of the city? It's quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would also be nice to hear, Marion, if you can relate to this, because you are also in the middle of the city. And Ku, I saw that you said yes very vehemently. So if you want to comment, just go ahead, right? Jump in. Yeah, but yes. Marion, go ahead.
So as you said, we are in very different environment, and Dakar complexity is different. In Dakar, the street owns to everybody. Everybody can do what he wants in the public space. So you can have a cooking restaurant, to have your breakfast shop. So, voilà, that's a complexity, but that was interesting to bring art and technology in the public space, and that's what we try to do, to interact with people and to. So we do many workshops like this, and we now also, for some years now, we have a mobile Fab Lab. I show you we bring the Fab Lab also in the street, doing workshops, staying for 1 week in different places. But we do workshops like this, from video mapping, not monumental video mapping, but small video mapping, Dakar typo workshops around the typography of with the visuals of on the Dakar special car rapid bus. We work on we invite artists and technology to interact with people, and with working also with archives. So the School of Commons is really based in our surrounding that has its own history, but we are not focused only in our district. It's also with all the city.
If it's okay, I'd like to share a few more slides that talk specifically about the idea of students as creators of knowledge. So for us, we don't have a word for art, because everything that we do and we did, we took it to that level of art. And so it's really about becoming creators of knowledge, but some people will call it art. But for us, it's really about creating knowledge. And so from very young on, we invite and train our students, our learners from, as I said, preschool all the way now up to college students to engage in art, both traditional art and contemporary art. And so here are just some of the ideas, from very young on. They already learn how to do things and then become these artists. So they take the inspiration from the land, in our case also obviously from the ocean, to create art. And this is all art that was created by our students. But as I said, we don't really call it art. We use it to demonstrate our love for the land, our relations to the land, and whether it's photography or whether it is creating signages for public spaces that then include, again, ancient pictures and putting things together. Our students create bilingual books on things around the environment to teach people about the environment and why we need to protect that environment, why we need to take care of this environment. From coloring books to other kind of books, they're all created using indigenous color palettes. And then we also do obviously traditional art where we take the plants and that are in our surroundings and create what we call functional art, as I said, because we don't just do something that hangs on the wall. And that for us also includes performing arts. So from the very, at the school that I founded, every year at the end of the year, our 150 something students are on the stage chanting and dancing and telling the stories of the land and educating their communities about who they are and where they come from and how that relationship to the land has transformed them and inspires them to create these chants and dances. Some of these are traditional chants and dances, but many of them are actually composed by the students themselves. And as they get older, they also then start to integrate modern, right? You can see this is on one side more the traditional, but on the other side, balancing that and integrating modern ideas, modern themes to do performing arts. And so that's kind of, I think, one of the exciting parts is that it becomes alive because it is real. Because they have that connection, they can express it in what other people would call art. But what for us is just an evidence of how much we love our land.
Thank you so much, Ku, for adding that. I was actually just hoping you would bring these elements of spiritual connection that I think also in this tradition of naming, it's almost an invocation, right? It is an invocation. It is an opening a channel. And I have witnessed many times with you how these ceremonial space are also function as space for building infrastructure of communities. And this question of space, as you were all sharing, make me understand even more that it's always a space time. All these projects create these dimensions where, yes, it's in place. We are learning from space. We are making space. We are holding space together, but these are also in this dimension of time, both because the practices are mostly process-based and process need time to do and undo constantly. And as you said, if learning is conceived from womb to tomb, it's a continuous dealing with our own existence. And if you observe our plant grow and bloom from a seed to the tree, it's a question of time. And all this process that you have shared is really like an offering of how to do that together and how to involve many elements. And this question of the ceremonial is, for me, has been very inspiring, as I think when we move, as many of us move in a more Western-centric societies, these bonds, both with each other and this other element and the other forces, including the evil forces, including the concrete and capitalism and patriarchy and all these that enter constantly in our space of being and learning together. I observed and I felt and I sensed it that sharing space with you, being part of ceremonials, bring this element of strengthening our communities when we do this type of challenging work that often is fragmented and has to deal with question of money, as Rosario was pointing out, question of ego, question of who is taking more space in a conversation, and all these ruptures that are part of life and certainly part of what we are doing. And I know also in Dakar, there is so much traditional healing and traditional spiritual knowledges. And Ku, you explained very well, I think, in all you do and share, that dimension is always interwoven. I wonder if, Marion, you have also used from Dakar this incredible knowledge of traditional way of living that is so much still part of the fabric of the town, although it's an urban setting.
No, as I say, we try to understand from what means the commons in the Wolof and not with Western language and this. Sure, but you know that there are many communities like Lebu and this, and sometimes we invite them in some events to work with communities, and it's a way to invite people to participate, and we sometimes cross with traditional with modern culture. So yes, but in city like Dakar, it's not so evident to have all this ceremonial, and it's more hidden part.
Okay, thank you. I was also thinking, Barbara, in a way, we're missing Cara, and again, sending her best energies and healing energies. But somehow I still want to evoke what the part of conversation we were hoping to have with her, and maybe through these we can open to the audience, as I assume, and I know I see a lot of people also working in culture institutions, and the piece we were hoping that Cara would offer in this conversation was exactly around the question of institutional space, as all the examples we have here are more grassroots and self-organized space, para or infra institutions, or institutions of the common, how the space of the institution is engaging with this question of unearthly politics. And Cara, as the person who has started the Tate exchange program and the Tate climate assemblies that are assemblies for the wider public, the cultural sector, but also for the Tate staff as well. So it was a kind of interesting example of also how an institution tried to decolonize itself or try to deinstitutionalize itself, or reflecting on the question that the infrastructure of the institution brings. And they did quite interesting experiments working in reviewing the politics in their building, in the waste management and retail supply chains. We know that the art world, the art system is also extracting and consuming and using a lot of carbon footprint. So it would have been interesting on, and maybe other can take these questions in our assembly. And I'm sure in the other days, this was also some point of discussions, like what it is that an institution like a museum, beside the obvious didactical, pedagogical use of the exhibition as a form of learning, or the public program as a form of learning in this direction of inviting many and different knowledges, but what an institution can really do, and what are the updates, what have been the example, the virtual example, and also how an institution can really make space for this other knowledge that have been coming from non-institution place without co-opting them, without extracting, without absorbing in the more mainstream knowledge production, and the risk that this brings when we do that. It's also a question for us curators here, or those who work in these spaces. So I'd like to hear from others around these points.
Yeah, so if I may add something, but also if any of you in the panel want to comment on this, or also, we can also open up to the audience. If you want to share questions in the chat, go ahead. But if you also want to share experiences, stories, or comments from your own practice, just raise your hand like Alex showed you, and we can unmute you. So we can also really open up the floor. But yes, thank you, Alessandra, for bringing up the unstable ground of the institution, because it's true. It's my question, working inside of one, is really what role can the institution and the education within an institution play to change the institution? And that was the Power to Change program that Cara would have wanted to present, is really how they evaluated their own building, but they created also an educational program for the public, but also for themselves, to educate themselves to become custodians and stewards. And this is something that, maybe all of you might want to share your experience with working together with institutions, which might always be problematic. And we heard in the panel before also about uncaring relationships with institutions. So I think that's really a problem. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you have any advice, or what would you tell institutions how to make it better, and how to be more humble maybe, and more conscious of this position? Maybe if you have anything to share.
I think for me, the experience has been that institutions are systems, and systems are resistant to change. Extremely resistant to change. And even if what we're providing is better from every perspective, than what they have right now, it's not the well-meaning people within the institutions, it's really the systems. And so to create that systemic change really involves critical mass. That's what we have found, that unless you have a critical mass, you cannot change the systems. As I said, we started a school within a school, trying to make the changes from within. And we found out that it just was not supported, even though in our case, our students that were failures because the system failed them, right, all of a sudden became successes. But instead of celebrating that, they cut our funding, kind of thing. So that's just the nature of systems, right, is to not make any changes because the system likes itself, whatever it is. And so we ended up saying, forget the system, we're going to work outside of the system, but we're still trying to influence the system. Right now, we're coming from outside and going back into the system. We're becoming providers for public schools to come to our learning labs, but it's taken us 35 years to get there, kind of thing. So one thing is critical mass, and the other thing is time. I think, you know, we are impatient naturally. I am certainly impatient. I want everything to happen tomorrow. I want to save the world by this afternoon if I could, kind of thing, right? But there is a factor of time as well. And this, in this modern age, you know, everything instant gratification. So I think we also have to factor that part in. It's building that critical mass, and it's factoring in the fact that it will take time to change these institutions. And I think if we keep those in mind, then at least our expectations are realistic, at least from my perspective.
Barbara, I can say that in Senegal, as you said, the institutions and system is very late compared to the urgencies of problems. As you know, there was main politics riots in Senegal not far than 1 month ago, and in terms of ecology, education, a lot of young people prefer to go through the sea to Europe instead of staying that. So, as Farid said the first day, for Farid Wankupa, for example, is part of the same network we are. Kyrgyzstan is part of his arts collaboratory, independent art institution. It's easier for us to do things quicker and to do network bridge. We cannot always contest the institution, but it's easier for us to experiment with art. It's very small what we do, but we create bridge. We open our space and also the public space. And on the long term, it's very important what we do. And not to be divided, but link with other. There are many initiatives from the civil society, and really to create this bridge and experiment with art, technology, and traditional knowledge, with as Q said, so not to be in opposition with the system, but to work with also museums of Dakar. We always try to create bridge.
And Rosario, I think you're dying to say something, and it makes me think of this critical companionship that you mentioned when we spoke the first time. So go ahead.
Yes, no, I just want to say that for me, institutions are also people, and it's not just a system. And I understand, of course, it's a system and it's rusty and change. It takes time. But it also it requires that the people in them have a certain willingness to transform. So I'm happy to see when I work with institutions, to see people like you, Barbara, that are calling in independent practitioners to inform your institution, and I think that's very valuable. I always like to think that I work especially in education and in my practice, I always try to work with the institution. So at the institution, in the university, and also outside, and to create the relay. Yeah. In another project that I've been involved in the last 2 years, it's called Making Futures, and it was situated at the UDK, and I did this with a team, and we always say we invite the city into the institution and we take the institution out to the city. So it's a double movement, yeah? And I think it's very important to think, and as Rosi Baidroti always says, is think the continuum and not the division. So it's not about in or out, for the system, against the system, but it's about creating, I think, this pathway for transformation. And I think that requires, yes, a lot of time, and sometimes to remind ourselves that, this being the exhaustion, that sometimes the system brings us to a level where we find ourselves losing by exhaustion. And I think this is very important when we bring the ethics of care and taking care of one another, and all of these restorative practices are very important to to, as we started today with the panel, I mean, it was not recorded, but we did this grounding exercise, right? And I think these are the things that are I think you should, yeah. I don't know how you bring this into the institution, yeah?
A quick note on that, because that's something that I learned through this preparation with you and in conversation with you, and especially also in conversation with Alessandra. So I think institutions have learned by now that it is crucial to invite others in. And I think also they have learned that it is crucial to go outside their walls and to build synergies. I think this has become kind of a, not a standard procedure yet, but institutions have learned, and education in institutions has learned, I feel. But it's really important that this question is still asked, who does this synergy support? So does it only support the institution, or does it support the other groups that come in? And that's something that I think still needs a lot more work on from institutions. And it's really, Alessandra, it's what you always say, you know, who does your work support? And this is a question that institutions oftentimes not have the time to ask, because everything happens so fast. And this is just something that I really picked up from talking to all of you in this preparation moment. So I wanted to point that out again.
I do agree that we're moving in the right direction, most certainly. But in general, the institutions still think that they're superior to us.
Yeah, okay.
You know, so they like our indigenous knowledge. They want us to dance hula for them. They want to showcase our things, but they are still superior to us in their mind. And that part it has not started to erode, at least not in Hawaii yet. There is more definitely more interaction, you know, and there's more, and not everywhere, but slowly there is more outreach into the communities. But it's still with this paternalistic kind of a viewpoint that they are the ones who are helping us, right? Kind of thing. And we need them kind of idea, you know. And that part, I'm talking from an indigenous perspective now. It's one thing if it's white, but if you're talking about brown and white, and we're talking about black and white, there is a difference still yet, where we're still this great white father, you know, who's coming to save us on his white horse idea. And the paternalistic part that Alessandra mentioned is part of that as well, right? It's that mentality. It's not overt, and they don't put it out, you know, but we feel it. And it is still bringing us down, right? Because anytime somebody interacts with you as you being less than, you know, it's hard to teach our young people to empower themselves, right? Kind of thing. Absolutely. So there's still, that shift still needs to happen. I just wanted to point that out.
No, thank you. And I think this is why I believe so much in art education, because in art education, there's a lot in the discourse. There's a lot of consciousness for eye level, Augenhöhe, if we would say in German. So there's always this, first of all, know again what ground you stand on, from what perspective you speak, and where these perspectives can meet. And in art education, there is this idea of participation as a power-related idea. So participation is participation when you give power up and you really share power of decision. And that not always works that well, but I think art education can bring this idea into the institution as well, from inside the system. But that's me being really optimistic, of course, and speaking from this position of art education inside an institution. I saw that we have a first question in the chat. I mean, we can go there, and also feel free to bring in some more points, even though I just checked the time and we can wrap up also soon, but okay. So there's this first question. Alice, do you want to bring it in?
Yeah, absolutely. It's maybe even by a non-human species because it's by iPhone. So I really don't know who it is, but I will just bring it on. The question was, what should we unlearn in regard to the institutions and the programs in order to create more space for solidarity with non-human species? So maybe that's a good question for the whole round. And
If I can propose, since we don't have much time, maybe you read all of them. It's only a few that happen, and then maybe.
Yes. Okay, then we will go on with another question by Ludi. To everyone, the main mission of museums is preservation. How do you see preservation and the notion of patrimony? Patrimony. Thank you, Barbara. Is it still relevant? And another question by Stefan. Who are the educators of non-paternalistic, symmetrical, empathetic education platforms or institutions? Do we need translators, mediators, rather than educators? And another question by David. Depends. No, it's actually an answer, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe each can choose what to start with. It's three really nice questions. And maybe also to make the bridge why Stefan is asking for translators, it was from the previous discussion where we said we need translators who would translate from rocks to, the boards of institutions, for example.
Yeah. So that kind of translation definitely is happening now from those who have been graduating from our place-based, project-based in the environment programs, but who are also very comfortable in walking in another world, right? In that Western world, in that academic world. And so that's basically what we try to train our students, is to know themselves as 21st century Kanaka, which are Hawaiians. That's their identity. But that they are also comfortable in walking in other worlds and becoming those translators, because the world needs those translators that can go in and out from the traditional to the contemporary, from the ancient to the modern. Because for us, really, when we look at it, ancient is modern. And the solutions that we have, particularly as it concerns global warming and taking care of the planet, all of that has already been done by our ancestors for thousands of years. So we really have the solutions that we can bring into this contemporary modern world to find, answers to the problems that face all of us on a global level today. And so I think you have to start with the babies, literally, and teach them to be comfortable in these multiple worlds, and then become the translators as they're moving into the institutions. And we're seeing a huge change there. We've been doing this Hawaiian focused education for 35 years. So we have our students are already PhDs, right? So they're already writing, they're already taking programs over. They're already leading businesses, et cetera, and they are the ones who are making those translations. And I think it's happening. That is happening in the indigenous world everywhere, from my perspective.
I think I would really like to add to this, because I think it's very beautiful how you think of this translator mediator position. And speaking of a position as a student as well, I would like to add to this entire conversation also the dependency that I see for myself also of institutions as well. And I think that having perspectives from multiple angles is really important to create this mediation and to create these also finding solutions for whatever issues there are in this topic. And I think, I'm depending on the credit system. I'm depending on getting paid as in credits to fulfill my education. And I think in this way, I lost a bit my track where I was going, but anyway, I think this translating, mediating position is really necessary.
I think so as well. And this also relates to another inner institutional question that our department for museum communication has been asking itself a lot with Janine Burger, who's the head of museum communication, and she decided really, consciously not to call the department Museumspädagogik, but to go for Museumskommunikation, so museum communication, which was already this idea of lowering this institution who is on the top and who teaches others, but to go into, no, we create situations of communication. And that was before communication became, press related and comms related. But I think this is really important also. And this is also why this wording is really important. And I really like translator, somehow, because mediator is also really nice. But I learned translator today, and I will think about it in relation to the practice of art education.
I agree that translation is a very important knowledge and pedagogy, because and I think in this context we should, of course, we don't only think about linguistic translation, but really a translation among different knowledge systems. And I think the example that Ku has brought in relation vis-a-vis of the relation with the institution, as really to also to go back a little bit to the question one of the person is bringing about museum as a place of preservation. And wanted to problematize a little bit about that preservation of what and accumulation of what, or protection of what. Museums have been, if we want to analyze the history of museum, there have been also infrastructure of coloniality. It's museum have been also instituted exactly at that moment where we colonize other places and cultures, and we brought back some items, some objects that have been completely, and the way we show them in our understanding of what art is, as taking away the life of those objects, as in many of those cultures, those objects were related to the everyday life, to cultural belief, to religious beliefs. They were sacred. So what does it mean when today, and I'm not only speaking about the ethnographic or the natural history museum, but also in a context of today, what does it mean when, for example, we invite indigenous artists in our, Western-centric museum, and where is not only one show, maybe with certain curators more versed in this dialogue with the other culture and more humble in doing that kind of work, but when the infrastructures remain the same. That's why, yes, one guidance is not impossible, and it's necessary work, I think. But that's why in thinking together, one important question is always who is going to benefit. As we were saying with Barbara before, when we bring an indigenous or Afrocentric vision into a Western European museum, or when we bring even our community-based projects, which are often coming out of communities of struggles, and we offer that knowledge in the institution, is the museum or the university or the school, whatever that institution is, when there is such a persistence of our as Ku was saying, predominant knowledge, when we always look at this experience from a more hegemonic position.
Yes, thank you so much for making that point, Alessandra. I think this is the critical point of our conversation, and it's always best probably to end at the very critical moments. So we will now.
It's best to end with some celebration of also the positive and the transformation that it has happened also in the institution, and certainly today and your practice, Barbara, and many others do that difficult work. And so I don't want to end in a too...
No, I think it's great. It's the purpose of this conversation. So it's really, thank you so much. And also thank you to all the other ones. It was really, really so nice to be learning partners and coming together in this conversation. And we have the pleasure of, ending with a ceremonial ending by Ku. And there's also the question in the chat, Ku, if you could show us your view, if that's possible, if your laptop is flexible, but maybe it's not.
Yeah. probably not where I'm at. I mean, I don't know if this does anything.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
All right. Here we do a very slow motion. There we go.
Oh, that's nice. You're sitting outside. That's also super nice.
Yes, because everybody else was still sleeping, right? When we started at 5 a.m. our time and it was pitch dark. I do want to say just really fast to talk about what Ale just ended with. That is a whole nother panel discussion, and I do hope that it will happen, and I would love to contribute. We are currently around the world getting back the things that were stolen from us, whether it's our bones, the bones of our ancestors that are sacred to us, whether it's our funerary object that were buried with the bones, whether it's our feather cloaks, and many of the families, particularly in Germany, institutions, particularly in Germany, have been willing to release these things slowly. So there is a whole new movement there, and I think that would warrant a whole new panel discussion about how indigenous peoples are bringing back the things that were stolen. That's the only way we can put it. You know, there's no other way of putting it. And how there is a positive movement in that direction. And we are very, very excited. We have a long ways to go, and not everybody is collaborative, but many institutions are. We have only one museum, and they just published a paper or doing an exhibit on a eugenics project that was done on Native Hawaiians, and are admitting how wrong that was when it happened, when it was funded by the museum in 1920, measuring our skulls, taking blood, and trying to prove that we were inferior, right, to the white people. And this is as late as 1920. But there's apologies now by the university, by the museum, and there is an exhibit about it that critically deals with that past that nobody's proud of, right? But that happened. And so at least we're acknowledging it and we're moving forward. So I think that we're definitely moving in the right direction. And so I'd like to share my final screen, which is the same way that I started, just the opposite way around. We open and we close, and it's basically a chant of gratitude to all of you folks. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Ale. Thank you, my co-presenters. Thank you also to the audience for joining us today. And here it goes. Mahalo ka lehulehu. Mahalo na makua. Mahalo na kupuna. Mahalo na lionu. Mahalo na umakua. Mahalo na kua. Mahalo. Mahalo, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Mahalo.
Aloha, mahalo.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, everyone.